start his session 3. David Hullsmanm is not able to come. He wants to become Spanish, so he has to do some tests to get his Spanish passport. And it's right now, so I will substitute him. So our first speaker is Guido Hullsman, professor at the University of Madrid. And we are very happy to have him here for the first time. I hope that Ryan will be president for a long time, so that he cannot go to the United States as a substitute. He comes here as he comes here. So it's great to have him here, Guido. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear students, it's a pleasure to present this talk to you this afternoon, the political economy of side effect goods. I'm sure most of you have never heard about side effect goods, although you can imagine what is this. And it's an expression that I have coined after working for almost 4 years on a book on the economics of gratuitous goods. And the book will be forthcoming next year at the Mises Institute. It's a rather large book which deals with the nature of gratuitous goods, the manner how gratuitous goods are being produced within the context of a free society, and then with the impact of government interventionism on gratuitous goods. So it was a journey of discovery for me when I set up dealing with this topic. I had a doctoral student who had written a dissertation on this topic 6, 7 years ago, and she did a fine job, especially reviewing the literature and developed some elements, but I felt that there was still room to contribute to this. So I set up myself and really expanded the treatment of this thing. So the book will be published next year by the Mises Institute, and there's a German edition forthcoming as well. And maybe one day there will also be a Spanish edition. And my book on the ethics of money production has been published this year.
A few months ago.
So, which is about 50 years after the publication of the first edition. So by that standards, as the book comes out in English in 2023, it might be then Spanish by 2038. So hold your breath. So we have here in our book, so it's a general theory of gratuitous goods, and gratuitous goods come in two forms, namely gifts on the one hand, and side effect goods on the other hand. It is gratuitous goods that are conveyed to other people as an unintended consequence of human action. And the general sources of these gratuitous goods are nature, so we have here human action, donations, and side effects. Yeah, okay. Now, why have you never heard about side effect goods? That's a question that you invariably have to ask yourself, because in standard economics, we of course have the concept of externalities. And so I'll be much concerned today with this theory of externalities. And externalities are dealt with in two ways, right? Negative externalities and positive externalities. Negative externalities is pollution, right? So doing certain things that has a negative impact on the welfare of other human beings. And then you have positive externalities, which is you do something. For example, a textbook example would be a beekeeper who has bees and he's producing honey, but at the same time he's also providing pollen services, right, to people who own apple orchards and other things. Or people might construct a dam in order to produce electricity, but at the same time they provide services for people living down the stream and whose land is no longer flooded by the river as it had been before. Okay, so they're positive externalities. Now the interesting thing is that positive externalities are usually dealt with as a market failure. It's something that is wrong in the economy. It's not something that you would encounter in a perfectly organized market. In a perfect market, in perfect competition, all goods are paid. And this is known as the condition of complete markets. those that are expressly transferred as gifts. So in standard economics, we just know paid goods, we know gifts, and we know market. Everything else is a market figure. Now in Austrian economics, things are different. In Austrian economics, so the standard theory, I'll go into this a little bit more later, has roots in Aristotle's conception of a just exchange. And in Aristotle, we have this idea in chapter 5 of his Nicomachean Ethics, where he deals with the virtue of justice. And he explains to us that justice itself is characterized by an equality between different terms, and the equality in an exchange is an equality of the value of the things that are being exchanged. So if this is true, then of course we have a direct translation of this neoclassical conception of the condition of complete markets. And only if all services provided by other people, and which are not intended as gifts, are truly compensated, do we have a really just society. In a way, the neoclassical conception of perfect competitive market and of general equilibrium represents this idea that ideally all services provided by others, which are not intended as gifts, are compensated by their just value. Now in Austrian economics, we have a very different conception. It's precisely this background that also allowed me not only to be interested in the topic, but also develop it along lines that are very different from the standard neoclassical conception. So in Austrian economics, negative externalities are a problem of the definition and enforcement of property rights. If property rights are perfectly defined and protected, well, then they are no negative external effects. And positive externalities are not problematic at all. They're just part and parcel of the market economy. We'll talk about this a little later. And the question now, of course, is if in Austrian economics external externalities are not a big issue, well, then how widespread are externalities, and where do they actually show up? And that's what I've been trying to do in my book. And I'll give you a few examples later of the things that I've been discussing in the book. And of course, then the question is also, what's the impact of government interventions on these goods? So what follows, I'll talk about side effect goods in a free society, and briefly talk about the reasons that have been given and the arguments that have been advanced to explain why side effect goods might appear to be problematic. And then we'll deal with government interventionism and its impact on side effects before I can conclude. So in a free society, we have various forms of side effect goods, material benefits for other people. For example, there are side effect goods resulting from virtuous behavior. There are some people that are behaving virtuously, that they're doing the right thing even if it doesn't pay. Right? So you're speaking the truth not only if it just arranges you, it gives you an increase in your salary, but because you honor truth itself. You're being just to other people, not because it's just fitting in the current context, because you can get away with fraud, but because you cherish justice in itself. Now each time we behave in such a way, we're invariably conferring material benefits to other people. Right? Because behaving virtuously counts precisely those cases in which some material advantage for us would be at stake. Right? If we're being rewarded for saying something that is true, so then it's fine to say something that is true anyway, and we get paid, and if we do something just, and it just fits our business plan anyway, that's fine. But that's not virtue. Virtuous behavior is precisely in those cases in which our self-interest is at stake, in which we are therefore losing something, and this something is then necessarily gained by other people. And so behaving virtuously creates side effect goods for other people. It is a side effect good because our intention is not to provide these services or material benefits to others, then it wouldn't be virtuous behavior either. It would be just a gift. So it is necessarily a side effect. Then there are material benefits of leisure. Leisure being now not yet understood in the opposite to labor. Labor being activities geared toward earning revenue, and very often the standard definition of leisure would be everything else, right? All activities that are not geared toward earning revenue, and which might also be just hanging out in front of a TV set or just enjoying a sip of your favorite drink at the swimming pool or something like this. So here I'm using the word leisure in a more restricted sense, in the sense in which philosophers would use it. For philosophers, leisure is actually a very active attitude, and it's a time that is consecrated for things in themselves, like pursuing a science, pursuing an art, right? Mastery of some art and so on. That is leisurely activity. And clearly, leisurely activity, think of the activity of an artist, or a famous writer like Professor Soto. He has dedicated his life to developing Austrian economics, not because he intended to earn much money with it, I'm sure he didn't earn much money from this, but just because he loved the truth, he loved Austrian economics, so he dedicated his time to developing the science. And now clearly there are lots of material benefits resulting from this for other people. I know personally many people who have benefited from being confronted to Austrian economics, which has saved them a lot of money because they went out of financial markets and various other investments in time because they would be losing it. And so clearly there are benefits for other people. There are benefits for people who enjoy the cathedral of the site of a beautiful cathedral, right? And the intention of the architect, let's say, could very well be that he would just wanted to glorify God. That's why he built this wonderful building, but the side effect of his activity is to create benefits to buy standards and so on. Then we have cultural commons, which is the term that I use in my book to designate those social institutions that Menger talks about in his investigations into the method of political economy and social science in particular. So money, language, law, and various other things. And so these are cultural commons that result from self-interested activities, but which create a reality that is of material benefit to other people. It's a huge difference whether you communicate with smoke signs or with hand and mouth symbols and something like this, or whether you are being able to communicate with a language, and with standardized symbols and so on that everybody understands, with concrete definitions and so on. It's a huge difference whether you can make ad hoc exchanges between dairy and cheese, or between microphones and water and something like this, or whether you can rely your exchanges on a commonly accepted medium of exchange, which enables you to rely and to develop monetary calculation and various other benefits. Right? So all of these benefits are then side effects. Right? The cultural commons themselves are side effects of human action. They're not intended as such. Nobody who exchanges wishes to create a monetary system, and the people who started communicating did not plan the development of a language, but nevertheless the language resulted from the activities just as money eventually emerged from self-interest exchange activities. Another example that is very important is ownership. Most people are actually not interested in being owners of the things that they own, they just want to reap the benefits. Most people who own a house or a car, they're just interested in owning the car and also to drive the car in order to live in the house and eventually resell it at a higher price at the price for which they bought it. But ownership is something else. Ownership carries is a whole attitude. Ownership is an attitude, and it's an attitude of care for the things that you own. And this is something that results spontaneously from the market. Now, this is more difficult to explain, and it would carry me too far away if you have a question about this. I will explain it. Right? But in the market economy, there is a tendency for people to wish to be owners. And precisely under government interventionism, this desire evaporates for reasons. And the first one to highlight this was Joseph Schumpeter in his 1942 book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. But Schumpeter didn't see the connection with interventionism. Another example for side effects are good examples. I mean, anything would be a good example for other people, because if something is an example or not does not depend on us, but on how useful our behavior might be as a model, negative or positive, to other people. If an entrepreneur succeeds in setting up a pizza shop in this place in the town, well, it will be very soon imitators who just do similar things in order to succeed as he has done. If he fails in his endeavor, then, well, this will be some sort of a signal to other people that they better should not try the same thing under exactly the same circumstances. Now, certainly he, in pursuing his project, did not intend to provide an example, but the example is providing precisely a side effect. Other people's errors, I will skip this a bit, but for those of you who are in the know, and all the Spanish students here have been told, know human action by heart. And so you look up here Ludwig von Mises' theory of entrepreneurial profits and losses, and you will see what I'm talking about. And other people's errors create material advantages for other people. Then we have side effects of exchange. Right? And of course here this is a standard topic on which we pride ourselves as Austrians, because we would explain to our grandfathers and to everybody else who cares to listen to us that in exchange we always obtain something that has for us greater value than the thing that we give up. So in every exchange, both partners benefit. Now the benefits that we procure to other people are not necessarily intended. We make the contract in order to obtain a benefit for ourselves. Of course, we might be happy that other people benefit from it also, but that's not the intention, right? That's not the objective of the exchange. Otherwise, it would be a gift. Right? So in exchange, we always have positive side effects, such as the one that I highlighted, and there are many others which I discuss in my book. Then there are side effects of savings. We had Professor Barber's talk this afternoon. All right, so savings do provide benefits for other people. For example, in allowing for a greater extension of the division of labor within a roundabout production. Right? The savers might not necessarily have this intention at all. They might just care for the return on their investment. But they nevertheless create the conditions that are necessary for an extension of the division of labor. And this is not something that they intended with their choice. Okay, so we have this, right? And we have this list, right? And I don't pretend that this is an exhaustive list. Right? It's a list that summarizes my reflection on this after 3 years or 4 years work on this topic, but that's not the last word. And I'm sure if somebody of you sets out to write a doctoral dissertation on the same topic, you will come up with other things, and that's how it should be. But my main point here is now, I mean, look, if we look at this honestly and soberly, we cannot fail to notice that the economic world is full of side effects. There are not just a few external benefits between beekeepers and apple orchard owners and dam construction people living in the valley and so on. The human economy is full of gratuitous benefits that we convey to other people without necessarily wishing this to be the case, and sometimes even while ignoring that we're doing this. And so the world is much richer than the world of exchange. Exchange is, of course, absolutely important and central for the construction of the division of labor and so on. And we need this. But on top of this, we not just have a little cherry on the cake, we have a whole coating of sugar. Right? The human economy is full of gratuitous goods that not only come in the form of gifts, but also of side effects. So what could be wrong about side effects? We've talked about Aristotle's theory of just exchange. Right? In the light of Aristotle's theory, well, what would be wrong with such a world is that people provide precisely services to others and they do not get paid. That would be unjust, unless they wish to convey these benefits as a gift. Right? And Aristotle's thesis might be called the equivalence postulate. I guess that's how I've called it in my book, because that's precisely what it is. It is a postulate. It is not a description of how things are, but it is a more or less arbitrary requirement of how things should be. Right? And the basic problem of Aristotle's equivalence postulate is that it is impossible to translate it into action. if you have an exchange, any exchange, between apples and oranges, right? How can the exchange between apples and oranges ever have greater? In fact, it makes no sense because the two objects exchanged do not have the same value. Right? Now Aristotle says, yeah, but therefore people invented monetary exchange in order to have a common unit of account. But the problem remains. Because if we now have apples exchanged for euros and euros exchanged for oranges, the euros are not equal to oranges and they're not equal to apples. They're still different. And even if we compare apple prices and orange prices, they are different. The apple price has the dimension euro per kilograms of apples, and the orange price has the dimension euros per kilograms of oranges. That's not the same thing. So the postulate is completely arbitrary. It cannot be translated to action. It's just a dead end. It's a completely intellectual dead end. So the amazing thing is that Aristotle's theory has survived through time in various manifestations, which I discuss in my book, but don't have the time to do now. But one manifestation that it took is the Arrow-de-Broglie general equilibrium theory. Now, some of you know that I am myself a staunch defender of general equilibrium, of the concept of general equilibrium, and especially against other Austrians who think they can do economics without. But that's not our topic. Our topic is a particular ingredient in the Arrow-de-Broglie theory of general equilibrium, which is the postulate of complete markets. It is the postulate that all goods be paid, all goods be compensated in general equilibrium. And this, but it's not as absurd as Aristotle's equivalent postulate, but it's clearly not the way things work in the real economy, as we have just seen, because in the real economy there are lots of side effect goods. Right? And the postulate is still arbitrary because Arrow-de-Broglie do not explain to us why all goods should be paid. Why should this actually be a good thing? Now we can sense there is formal convenience, namely, if all goods are paid, then it's easier to translate a general equilibrium situation into a system of equations. And it would be very difficult if some goods were not paid, right? Because then we have benefits, we have quantities, but no corresponding prices. That's a little problem for a general equilibrium system of equations. But of course, that's not a material reason for us to say, yes, therefore that's a good thing. Well, because in the real world, because economists wish to model the world with a certain methodology, therefore the world better should conform to their model, otherwise it would not be efficient or just or whatever. Right? That's absurd. That's putting the cart before the oxen. And you know, from a different context, I'm reminding you of the debate around monopoly theory. We have the same thing. Right? In monopoly theory, and we have the idea that a monopoly is bad according to some preconceived little criteria, because we have a difference between the price of the good and the marginal cost. Right? So marginal cost is lower than the price. Right? So therefore, this is something wrong and should be corrected through suitable government intervention to bring the real market closer to the perfectly competitive equilibrium situation in which prices coincide with marginal cost. It's just as true. It's the same error. Now, if we accept the postulate of complete markets, then of course positive externalities appear as market failures, as I've said. Now, in critique, we might point out, actually I've already delivered the critique, right? So I've explained to you why and for which reasons Aristotle's theory cannot be accepted at face value. In fact, I've called it a dead end. That's what it is. It's just a great error. We can say about Aristotle the same thing that Murray Rothbard once said about Marx. I said the basic error of Marx was to found the theory of justice on value theory and not on property rights. And we can say the same thing about Aristotle. The basic error is in defining a just situation not in terms of the legitimacy of transfer of property, but in terms of the value of the goods. It just doesn't work. Okay, so from an Austrian perspective, side effect goods exist, and that's wonderful, and we should share this. This is one of the greatest things of the market economy. We should actually celebrate it and spread the good news as far as we can. Now, how do fare side effect goods under government interventionism? Well, in a word, they don't fare well. And government interventionism, by and large, brings about a systematic destruction of side effect goods. It makes the world ever less generous, ever less abundant in terms of goods that we receive without having to pay for them, and makes people then therefore ever more selfish and so hyper-concentrated on any benefits that they might obtain through exchange, because exchange then remains the only way to obtain any benefits at all. We might mention here, for example, legal monopolies. Legal monopolies, monopolization of money, monopolization of the law, even attempts to monopolize language. I don't know how widespread this is in Spain, but in Germany we have some public institution that pretends to define how language is used by people, should be used, and so on. Right? Now we know, I remind you very briefly, because we heard about this today already, that of course one government gets involved with money. If the government runs the monetary system or creates a monetary system, then of course usually things go down from there with money. Right? So it's a destruction of money for the benefit of the government, but to the detriment of all other market participants. Similar things can be said about the law, as we've learned from Bruno Leone and others. Good examples, presuppose, that you actually know how to recognize a good example, and that you have the means to translate your recognition into action. Now, government schooling and various other things systematically undermine the ability of people to know and recognize anything whatsoever. And government capital destruction destroys the means that would enable us to translate autonomous action into praxis. Right? So even if we have good ideas, we have less means to carry them on. Other people's errors, I'll skip this, but by and large the idea is that governments try to monopolize the benefits that result from other people's money by creating legal institutions that force entrepreneurs, for example, through a legal liquidation process, which creates then concentration of benefits of other people's errors for some. Side effects of exchange. I'll skip this as well, it will take me too far, but side effects of exchange is essentially governments systematically reduce the ability of the economy to produce goods and services, and as a consequence, whereas here he is, right, published important work, recent work on the income effect, right, and the income effect is in fact a gratuitous side effect of producing goods to the market. Right? We always convey some material advantage to other people, even if we do not intend it, and this side effect evaporates under the effect of interventionism. Now, monetary interventionism is a particularly important form of interventionism, and monetary interventionism creates a world in which it becomes ever more interesting to invest all one's resources in the pursuit of revenue. Okay. In a free market, there is a free market contains a natural saturation mechanism. Because a free market, if you accumulate a lot of capital, right, capital becomes less scarce, therefore the value of capital diminishes, so the return on capital diminishes. Therefore, at some point, if the return on capital diminishes again and again, well, it no longer becomes interesting to just invest money in the pursuit of revenue. You do other things. You embellish your own house, you make donations, you do charitable work, and all of these other things. You spend a life in leisure in doing economic research, artistic endeavors, and so on. Now, under monetary interventionism, you create a situation in which it becomes in which you destroy the saturation mechanism. So under monetary intervention, if you are willing to leverage your investments, you always have the possibility to to invest any of your available savings. So they're never dedicated to leisure activities or to non-revenue generating activities, but always into the last penny to revenue generating activities. Okay. And that creates then a certain stringency and a certain, well, absence of virtue, right? Because people spend also all of their time on pursuing revenue generating activities. My time is running out, right? So you see, monetary interventionism destroys all of these side effects, right? And I'll skip also the side effects of interventions. So the main conclusions which I would submit to your attention is that two main conclusions, namely that side effect goods are pervasive in a free society. Many, not all of them, but many spring from market economies, activities, and this is perfectly fine. This is a good thing. It's one of the greatest things about the market economy. Well, we shouldn't say about the market economy, but about the free economy, an economy without interventions. One of the greatest things. And government interventionism destroys these goods. Right? Legal monopolies in particular, but even more so monetary interventionism, undermines the ability of, not only the ability and willingness of people to make gifts, because that's what they do as well, but they also destroy the mechanisms through which